The Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission has warned that urgent action is needed to better protect disabled people from violence, abuse and neglect in institutional settings. Speaking before the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Disability Matters, Liam Herrick, the Chief Commissioner, said reform is moving too slowly and that many disabled people still lack adequate safeguards and community supports. To discuss the issues raised and more besides, I am joined by the disability rights activist and political advocate Anne-Marie Flanagan, who joins us on the line. Anne-Marie, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan. How are you and the listeners? And this is a very difficult topic, isn't it?
It is indeed. I mean, when you heard the comments from, or the warning, I should say, from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission that abuse and neglect remain serious issues in institutional settings for those living with disabilities, I would imagine it was of no surprise to you, but do you believe the wider public fully understands the reality that many disabled people still face in these settings?
Yeah, so yesterday, just for listeners, there was a full and detailed a representation both by independent researchers and the Human Rights Commissioner on the violence against disabled people who are living in residential places, institutions effectively, both congregated settings for which it's not in line with human rights. We had a plan many years ago to dismantle them and to support people to live in the community with the supports around them. And what we heard yesterday was, for me, quite difficult to hear, just as a human being, to hear that there are people who are in our society in 2026. I mean, we heard something like 4,000 complaints and over 1,000 progressed into serious complaints. And I suppose what really spoke to me was the evidence brought forward by Dr. Lucy Michael and Dr. Rosaline McDonough, who is a renowned disabled activist and author herself, and the evidence that they did a piece of research and spoke to individuals who experienced violence and their family members and staff who themselves had serious issues around it. And what, if I was to pick one particular point that was made, and it was restated time and time again, was that we need to see the violence against disabled people as a crime and escalate it to a crime. And to do that, we need to bring forward legislation that recognises that as a crime. And there was a lot of talk around the need for, in quotes, further investment, to deal with reporting, to give more powers to inspectors. But what really needs to happen is that when a crime against another human being happens in the broad general society, so there are lots of legislation that protects an individual and the Gardaí are assigned to that case. That isn't the situation when it comes to disabled people. I mean, we have seen it time and time again. We had the Auris Attractive scandal, and thankfully it was, our national broadcaster that broke that. We have the Brandon report up in the north, where many disabled people were sexually and physically violated, and that was protected for years and years and years. And then we had the Grace Commission, and the listeners need to know over 5 or 4 million euro was spent on investigating what happened, Grace, and 15 other children who were supposed to be protected by the state. And so what's happening is we don't see these children and adults as full human beings. We see them as their commodities, or when we use language, even a language like service users or residents. it takes away, these are people in their homes, even if we don't agree with the type of home that it is. So I should be safe in my home, and if a person is forced to live in a residential facility, institution, setting, whatever language it is that person's home, and they should be protected in the exact same way as you and me, and they are not. Yeah, and so things like low staffing gets priority, or their stress. No matter how stressed a human being is, or if they're not paid properly, it does not give them a right to physically, psychologically, or mechanically through medication or through sexual violence harm another human being.
The Commission argues that institutional settings themselves can create conditions where abuse flourishes, and I guess it's clear the system is fundamentally too reliant on institutional care. But Anne-Marie, if Ireland is serious about independent living, what practical supports need to be put in place? Be it, housing, personal assistance services, healthcare, transport, anything else?
Yeah, so the listeners hear us all the time, and you're fantastic at facilitating us to highlight this. Like, the solutions are there. But if the state was really committed to responding to disabled citizens in the same way as it does non-disabled citizens, then we would, for example, if you look at the statistics around housing issues and homelessness, unfortunately, the majority of disabled people's housing needs are not within those statistics because they're categorised differently. So that's the first thing. We need to view people's housing needs in the same way as others. So therefore, housing stock needs to fully account for the full living needs of disabled people. We've seen, for example, that when houses are being built over the years, that developers had a problem with ensuring that a percentage of the housing were livable for people with physical and other impairment support needs. So in our opinion, all houses should be universally designed so that people can live in them. We know that 65% of disability is acquired. So this idea that, it's only children born with impairments. Anyone can acquire a disability, and we've said this repeatedly. Personal assistant and independent living support services. So often when we're looking at this from a financial perspective, it's presented as additional and new money that we don't have. When the government needs to be brave, dismantle the institutions and redirect the money to support people to live in the community. This is a human rights atrocity that's happening. And I'm really, really delighted that the Disability Matters Oireachtas Committee really addressed this in terms of, and using the language of, crime against people. So I know as a woman, as a feminist, I would have been involved in, for us as a society, trying to understand domestic abuse, we called it years ago. Now, thankfully, we're recognising that it is domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, and that can happen in any sphere where people find themselves, whether it's living at home in intimate partnership or whether that home is in an institution and violence happens. And so that policy, for example, around the zero tolerance policy, that when we're thinking about the solutions, when we're thinking about refuges, when we're thinking about the supports that people need, we automatically factor in that women and men experience domestic abuse and how we provide supports to do it. The other thing that was really shocking in terms of the report yesterday, or the evidence yesterday, was that when people bring forward violence against them, that they become they're victimized again, they're vilified, and that people are afraid to highlight the abuse that they're experiencing because they are often or fear being excluded from that service. And then where do they go? I mean, that's an outright crime. And then to turn it into a HR issue rather than, bringing in the Gardaí to investigate it in the same way you would any other crime. So we absolutely need, it's a cultural response, it's a human response to actually treat this really seriously, to bring forward legislation that protects the person first and foremost, that recognises it as a crime, and that immediately you remove that person from that situation or put support in place, and that there is, we talk about trauma-informed response. I mean, anyone who has an understanding of what trauma and informed response means, that first of all, you believe the person. You say, what can I do for you? Even if it's an allegation that needs due process. You respond to the individual with compassion, with care, with dignity, and you go through that process. But if that person, and the other, as you heard yesterday, sorry Ellen, one other thing, the amount of disabled people and they don't communicate through words, and so therefore having trained people to allow that person to express themselves, to try and interpret behaviour, because what's scary and frightening is when somebody's expressing themselves through behaviour, maybe through fear or anger or whatever, what happens is they get medication to control the behaviour rather than going, what's happening and what's going on for that person? Why are they acting out? Why are they behaving in this way? And why are they becoming what might be deemed a danger to themselves and then others? And you focus on the other and protecting the staff rather than investigating what happened to that person.
And that's the kind of thing, Anne-Marie, that has led to the Commission saying disabled people cannot afford further delay. You've mentioned you want to see legislation as soon as possible. I just wonder, with Ireland due to face renewed scrutiny from the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, how important international pressure might be in driving reform here should the government drag their heels on that legislation?
Of course not, but we want government to take this really seriously. Of course there are public servants at senior level and government representatives that if they are not themselves a disabled person, they are the brother, the sister, the uncle, the aunt, the relative, the neighbour of good friends who are disabled people who need urgently their attention, to be sickened by, to see this brutality as unacceptable in this state and to respond with that urgency. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. So hopefully, my understanding is that the people who participate, the elected representatives, the senators and TDs who participate in the Oireachtas Committee on disability matters are, they volunteer to do because they passionately believe in the rights of disabled people, as we all should. We're human beings. And, for me as an activist and as a disabled woman, I think, it's really important to put the word disability in front of it so we recognise. And then sometimes I think, God, I wonder how helpful that is, because rather than seeing us as people with feelings, with emotions, with that to feel physical pain and fear on an equal basis with others, I sometimes think that generally, not everyone, but the general public, a huge proportion of the general public, really believe that certain disabled people with particular impairments don't have these feelings and don't have the same rights, and that are a cost, and that there's no solutions. It's not true. There are lots and lots of solutions, and we need to act with compassion, with care and urgency. And if we listen to disabled people, as Dr. Rosaline McDonough said yesterday, if we really listen, we can hear. And it's about putting those supports in place, redirecting. And again, I state it often, the state is spending nearly $5 billion on institutionalising disabled people. It's a shocking indictment. We need to redirect the money, and we need to be brave around it and support people to live in the community and to provide the independent living supports. We can see people flourishing, no matter how high the impairment support need is, when they're supported to live in the community and have the same opportunities as anybody else.
OK, look, we do have to leave it there, but we will watch with interest to see if the government acts with a sense of urgency and brings in the appropriate legislation. My thanks to you, Anne-Marie. That's Anne-Marie Flanagan, the disability rights activist and political advocate, with us on Friday's Morning Focus.